and she will talk about biocontrol, biological control efforts of purple loosestrife, followed by Holly Bushman in LeSueur County. We'll take a quick break. I will jump on and talk about voter observations of tool uses at accesses. And then lastly, Joe Albert will talk about the Keep It Clean law, and we will end with some open discussion. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to April Londo.
All right, let me just get it all queued up here. Thank you, Adam. So let me know when you can see that.
I just saw it for a second and now it went away.
Yeah, hold on. I got a new computer and I don't think it's going to let me do what I want to do, which is have two screens because I'm at home and it's not going to let me, is it? Hang tight. While everybody's coming in and kind of waiting for me to troubleshoot this, I just wanted to ask a question and you can put it in the chat. Just want to get a sense of where everybody's at, and this is a good icebreaker anyway. So first off, have you heard of biological control for purple loosestrife? And if so, do you know who to go to if you want to rear or release yourself? So where are you getting that information from? Okay, we're gonna roll with it. Okay, you see that, everybody?
Yep.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
I
but
can
we're seeing your.
I see the small. You just haven't. There we go. Perfect.
Perfect.
Is that good?
Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, my name's April Londo. I'm the invasive species specialist for Region 3 South. So we have 4 different regions in the state, and they're broken out into 2 different districts. So I put Jenna Nelson also on here because she is going to be your main point of contact with this. I'm handing over the torch now that she is all up to speed on everything. So I'm happy to do that. And so her and I developed this PowerPoint for you guys. So what I'm going to be talking about today is where we've been as a program in terms of biological control, because we don't know where we're going, right? Unless we actually look at our past and what's been done already. We're going to look at our current status and then our future directions and how all of you can help out. So just to start, if you are not familiar with the plant, purple loosestrife is native to Eurasia, so Europe and Asia in between there. It was introduced into the United States in the 1880s. This is a very showy plant, and you usually see it along the roadsides on ditches. They have this beautiful, showy top in the summer. And how you can identify it is it has this, if you can see my pointer, it has this kind of blocky stem, usually 4 or 5-sided. So when you touch the stem, you'll feel that ridging. It also has it has lance-shaped leaves and smooth edges. So there aren't any serrations along here. So those are a few tips to look for. The actual flower itself has 5 to 6 pink to purple petals on it. And the most common show, or I guess look-alike plant would probably be blue vervain. But this is definitely a lot more pink to purple, and it has that blocky stem. So it's in every state other than Florida. It's an emergent aquatic plant. What that means is that it's sticking out of the water, and it really occupies a range of habitats. It can be a wet habitat, or we've also seen it in more drier conditions. It grows 1 to 3 meters in a height, and adults can produce upwards of 2 million seeds a year, and their root crowns, so the roots in the actual sediment, can grow to be very, very large. The main management options we have for any invasive species, we have biological control, we have chemical control, and then we also have mechanical control. So that is the same for purple loosestrife. But the main one that we're going to be focusing on today is our biological control agent. There are 3 main types of beetles that have been found to feed on purple loosestrife, specifically purple loosestrife. And they're kind of sectioned into these 3 types of categories. So the first category on the bottom, they're flower feeding weevils. I haven't seen these much in the state. Root boring weevils are very hard to see because they're primarily in that root system. So we're going to be talking about the leaf feeding beetles today. So Galericella, we have 2 different species in the state that most likely you will be able to see if they are present. So these are the 2 beetles, and what happens is they feed on the leaf, and therefore the plant can't photosynthesize anymore. So it's breaking down the tissue that the plant would use to produce food. All right, so before we get to this part, I just wanted to do a brief history here. So purple loosestrife was first documented in the state of Minnesota in 1938. So that's almost 50 years after the first observations in the United States. The purple loosestrife program for the DNR, the invasive species program, was first established because of purple loosestrife in 1987. And then in 1989, it was expanded to Eurasian water milfoil. In 1991, the DNR established what we now call the invasive species program. In 1992, with the help of Luke Skinner and Wendy Crowell and a lot of our predecessors, they developed this biological control rearing project. So that's when it began. And the reason why it started then is because there was a lot of research being done in other countries for the use of these weevils, these leaf-eating weevils. And this was the first time that they really tried it in this state. In 2000, that was really the height of the purple loosestrife beetle release effort. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a little bit. And then in 2005, we really thought, purple loosestrife was pretty much managed at that point. So I'm just going to go through briefly about the implementation of the biological control. It was a huge effort. They really established what you see here. They had all of these rearing ponds, if you will. Really, it was pools, right? Kiddie pools. And in each of these, you can see is a purple loosestrife plant or a couple plants. And what they did is they collected the beetles and then they grew them out in these enclosures. So they developed this rearing program and the methods to assess establishment and control and success. We actually had these rearing areas in our office right by the Minnesota River in St. Paul. And they also gave out rearing kits to people. Like I mentioned, this was a very huge collaborative effort. It included, MDA, County Agricultural Inspectors, University of Minnesota, Department of Transportation, School and Nature Centers, and then also Boy Scouts and 4-H clubs. And I don't know if you've been to our office at Warner Road, but this is Warner Road office. And this is an example of the byproduct of the rearing all of these beetles that they then could go and put them out into an abundant purple loosestrife stand. This is a figure just showing you the amount of beetles that were disseminated at these points in time. So the height of the dissemination was in the 2000s. So 1.8 million beetles were put out on purple loosestrife stands. So there was, when I say it's a huge effort, it's a huge effort. That's a lot of beetles going out. Over on this picture, you can actually see the damage from the beetles that were caused. This is the larva, and then this is the adult form. So this is going to be an example of one site over the years, and they put out a whole bunch of beetles. I don't know how many, but this is from Luke Skinner's time. And it was a PowerPoint presentation that he did in 2009. And so this is a site that they put these beetles out in 1987. And as we go through time, you can see how it was just basically eaten up by the beetles. And as you can see here too, native vegetation, emergent vegetation is coming in, which looks great. So in 2005, you don't see any purple loosestrife on this landscape. And this is right by the Mississippi River. So the Mississippi River is just over here. All right, so that's all fine and good. We thought that we had it all managed, right? But purple loosestrife can still grow, it can still move, it can still spread. So why did I start this project again? What happened was I started in 2016, and right after I started, my lead worker said, okay, you can handle purple loosestrife from now on. And I really noticed an increased calls from citizens and increased concern over how many plants they were seeing on the landscape again. There was also increased interest from counties and watershed districts actively manage this plant. Purple loosestrife beetles can reproduce and spread naturally, but their numbers probably declined naturally as the purple loosestrife around the state declined. So most likely the naturalized population of Galaracella beetles are not abundant enough now to suppress the current population. So that's why we need to revitalize the population. So like I mentioned, there was this increased concern in 2017. I held our first beetle collection workshop at White Bear Lake in 2017. In 2019, we had more of a cooperation. I reached out to county and watershed districts, and I wanted them to ground truth where we're finding beetles and where we could potentially disseminate beetles for control. And then in 2022, we did more workshops. This was with Region 3 North, my predecessor in the North, Chris Jurek. And then in 2023, we revamped our website with additional resources, and we really had a lot of county and regional partner involvement. So this brings me to all of you and my question initially of, if you know about purple loosestrife, you're interested in it, how can you individually get involved? And I'm going to go through a couple ways. And this is not an exhaustive list. So Wild Rivers Conservancy is doing a major push, a huge project where you can go onto this website, and just to keep in mind, all of the websites that I'm going to share with you, I created a list, and Adam and April can send it out at the end of all the talks today. So then you can just go right to these websites and peruse for yourself. But what they're doing is they are offering information and workshops for themselves, and trying to get people involved in rearing beetles and also releasing beetles. So this can be anyone from Minnesota, but the caveat here is that it has to be next to the St. Croix or Mississippi River in the Wild River Conservancy. So there's that opportunity. And then most recently, the University of Minnesota Extension reached out to Jen and myself, and they are wanting to do a Purple Loosestrife project where they are going to have online tutorials and a website available for you. And we are going to use the EdMaps platform to go out and look for beetles, and also look for stands that might be good for release sites. So those are kind of the two questions that we have, and hopefully will be answered by this project. Lastly, the DNR also has some opportunities for you. So I'm going to talk in a little bit about our backyard beetle project that is easy enough for you to do in your own backyard if you want to. And then we also have some workshops. So all of our PDFs are online, so you can look at those there. So this was a project I did in our backyard. I have 2 young kids, and they thought it was pretty cool to find some beetles. So I got 4 plants. One of them died, as you can see, because there's only 3 in this picture. But what I did is I put 10 beetles in each, and I would say that I probably got about 300 from these enclosures, maybe 200 to 300. And then we put it out on a really abundant Purple Loosestrife stand near an retirement home. We also offer rearing workshops. So these are very, very informative. Jenna is going to be doing one again this year. We already have one planned for this year. Most likely it will be the end of April or early May, depending on when the beetles actually emerge. So for future directions, just for the DNR in general, we really want to understand the beetle release sites. So where can we put these beetles once we find them, right? We need really abundant plant growth, more often than not over an acre. And we're working with Conservation Corps of Minnesota, IDEC, and University of Minnesota Extension for this. We also want to create maps and have a better idea of where to collect the beetles itself. And we want to update our maps, like I said, at least for the metro area. And we're going to be doing the workshops. Once again, we have one planned already for this year. We want to continue to work with lake groups, counties, and others to release beetles. And our main goal here is to develop a local rearing program. So for example, Ramsey County is very interested in the rearing of the beetles, and they want to develop a local program. Also, Wild Rivers also has a rearing program. So because invasive species specialists have so many invasive species now to manage, we're really looking to partners, and we will help you as much as we can. But we're really looking to local partners to develop more of these rearing programs so then we can really manage purple loosestrife again. So with that, thank you. And what do you need from me to get started, or any questions?
Excellent. Thank you, April. Yeah, does
Mhm.
anybody have questions for her?
I have a question. Good presentation, April.
Thank you.
What do you think it is about purple loosestrife that makes it susceptible to biocontrol compared to other plants? Is it something about the biology of the plant or just the amount of effort that went into this project? Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, so the beetles themselves come from the same place that purple loosestrife comes. So the beetles are the plant's natural predator. So we haven't really found a lot of damage on other native plants because of that reason. They kind of evolved together. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
There's a question in chat, April, if any permits are needed for the process.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So you do not need a permit for moving the beetles, but you do need a permit to move if you want to do your own rearing project, to move any of the propagating parts. So that would be the flowers, the seeds, the roots, anything like that. You do need a permit. And if you are moving the beetles, and let's say you have to drive a couple hours, you're going to have to put a leaf or something like that in there. So I would say that definitely if you're rearing your own beetles, you will need a permit. If you're moving the beetles alone and it's just, a small drive, then you could probably just get away with transferring the beetles without a permit. And you just reach out to your specialist in your area.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, April.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Then we can move on to our next presenter. So Holly, I will let you take it away. Holly will be presenting on some more purple loosestrife in her biocontrol workshop down in LeSueur County.
So can you hear me okay, Adam?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. And then just want to make sure you can see my screen.
I can right now. I see the main, it's just not large yet.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you. Good?
Yep.
Okay,
perfect.
awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'm here today to talk about my purple loosestrife biocontrol workshop. My name is Holly Bushman, and I work with LeSueur County, and I think April did a really good job introducing this topic. So this essentially would be something that you could do locally based off of the information, April has shared, but then locally be able to implement it. So I'll be talking about that today. So first, I'll just talk about how the project got started, the permits that are needed, the supplies you'll probably need, collection and rearing of the beetles, verifying any purple loosestrife locations within your jurisdictional boundary. Then I'll talk about our workshop we held and then some lessons learned, and then I'll have some time for some questions. So how did I even start this project? How did this even work and begin? While I was attending a meeting just like this one, I've always have found them really, really valuable. And we started to have conversations about purple loosestrife and managing it. And I wanted to learn more. And so in order to kind of jump on that train, I attended a workshop and then just started doing some research and reaching out to my local AIS specialist and asked if she would be interested in assisting. And it kind of just all fell together from there. It was just merely of an interest, and then we made it into a project. And so in the meantime, before we actually did any collecting of beetles or plants or anything like that, I worked with my AIS specialist to collect all the permits that were required prior to that workshop that was held in June. So this was all done in the springtime. And then additionally, I was able to collect all the tools and materials that I would need in order to do some kind of rearing project. And then lastly, I signed up for the Purple Loosestrife Beetle Collection Workshop, which April had mentioned. It was on Wednesday, June 7th in Roseville. So that's kind of the steps on how I got this project started. And these are the permits that April was mentioning. They're super easy, not difficult by any means, and it's basically just to collect and possess any of the purple loosestrife plant and transport them. So that's basically all it is. It's two-sided. I think it was really easy, and it was, you know, started in April and then ended in December. So really easy permits to obtain. As far as the collection of materials and the plants themselves, so what you'll need in order to do any kind of propagation and rearing of beetles is a kiddie pool, a shovel, some pots, some potting soil, shears, netting, which I got from the DNR to help out with that part, a place to actually store your plants, and then bottles to collect your beetles. And they can just be any kind of bottle that, you know, they're not going to escape out of. And then the collection of the plants themselves. In addition to getting the permits, then I went to a neighboring county actually to collect the plants. There was a ditch in Rice County in Longsdale, so they were really easy to collect and easy to access. So I partnered with the DNR, my AIS specialist, and we each collected 3 plants in May. And we brought our pots with. One thing to make a note of with those plants is it's really helpful if you can clean them off a little bit. So we had a spray bottle and just kind of cleaned them off and made sure we didn't bring excess dirt or materials. That worked really, really well. And then these roots that the purple loosestrife have are really deep. So you got to make sure you dig deep enough to get that taproot out and you're not cutting it off. So just some notes for actually collecting the plant themselves. So it took us maybe a half an hour and we had plenty of plants. We decided that having at least 3 was helpful. 1 was too less, and just wanted to make sure we had enough plants before we started this project. So this is what the setup kind of looked like prior to the beetles. The local SWCD was kind enough to let me store my kiddie pool and my plants in their workshop. And so, yeah, I just went to the local hardware store, bought some potting soil, the kiddie pool and the plant, in the pots themselves, and then just planted them in there. The one tricky part I had was just getting them to stay upright. So I did put some sticks or some, you know, something to kind of prop them up and just lightly tie them to them so they could stay upright until they were good to go. As far as the actual collection of the beetles, like I said, I attended the workshop on June 7th in Roseville. It was really great. I encourage you to go to that, even if you're not interested in rearing beetles. It was just really good awareness and education tool. At the workshop, there was a discussion about the biology of the plants and the beetles. And then we actually went out to the field and collected the beetles. I partnered with our local extension office and also DNR office too. They had their separate kind of plants they were growing, and we collected and reared beetles. I actually counted all of the beetles and the larvae we collected. I thought that would be kind of an interesting data source to have. So we collected a total of 58 adults. 40 were the golden loosestrife beetles, and then 18 were the black margin beetles. And then additionally, we collected 65 larvae. So quite a bit of individuals that we collected to release onto our plants. And then I tried to split them up as best as I could between the plants. They're a little tricky. The beetles like to fly away and whatnot. So it was a little bit tricky, but we figured it out. And yeah, we just released them onto the plant and then covered, you know, I had the netting material to cover it so they didn't escape. So when we were out in the field, this is what you would see. And April did a good job too explaining how you can see it's decaying on the right hand from all the beetles and the larvae eating it. And there's holes in the purple loosestrife plants. So on the right are the larvae. They're just really tiny yellow critters. And then on the left is a beetle. What's interesting with these beetles is they're kind of smart in the sense that they, like, if you're not ready to collect them and put your container under them, they'll just fall and they'll drop. So there was quite a few that dropped on me. You kind of got the hang of it, but yeah, they are kind of tricky little buggers to catch sometimes. So just one thing to note with that, but it was super fun. again, it was only a couple hours, and then we had a ton of beetles and larvae to release. Again, this was just kind of field collection. You can see the beetle on the right here. They're kind of hard to see. You have to kind of look under the plant and stuff. And then just seeing that they're doing their work, right? They're controlling the species, and you can kind of see little yellow dots on here, and that would be the larvae that's eating the plant. So this is what it looked like when I brought it back to the shop. I had my containers, and then I could count them and sort them out. And then on the picture on the right is the actual netting, and you can see all the little beetles that are crawling around on the netting. So they were pretty happy, I think, to be out of that bottle for sure. And this is what the final setup looked like, just the kiddie pool, the nets, and then I just tied them all together so they would stay up tight and upright. And yeah, so I just would monitor them until we were ready to release the beetles themselves. A lot of times it was just making sure that I was watering the plants. So I poked holes on the bottom of the pots so then they could just absorb the water from underneath. That seemed to work out well. I probably had to water every few days unless it was really hot. I just wanted to make sure they were watered, and then I would check on the beetles and see if I could find them. There was a point when they did so well at eating these purple loosestrife plants that I actually had to go get more plants because they were just gone. So I had to shift around and add some more plants. And again, that was a little tricky, but I made it work. But yeah, they definitely enjoyed those purple loosestrife plants for sure. So after I had set that all up, we had some known populations in the county. So I sent out letters essentially. One of the areas was by a county park on Rays Lake, but the rest of them were private land, and LeSueur County is just this area here. And so I went and looked at all the populations, and I could only find the one at Rays Lake Park, which is down at the southwest part of the county. That was the only populations I could find. You know, I'd met with various landowners, and we took a walk and talked about purple loosestrife, but we couldn't find anything. So that's good news in that sense. Kind of crossed those off the list. And then yeah, Rays Lake was our only site where we've actually found purple loosestrife. And then additionally, to help increase awareness, since this was a park, I thought that creating some signs just to increase awareness to residents about the purple loosestrife plant itself, and then that there's biocontrol in the area would be helpful. And I was able to partner with our local parks department, and Tyler was kind enough to let me post these signs. There was also a QR code included on these, so if you wanted to report sightings, it would link to EdMap. So I thought these were just really helpful. If anything, again, to increase awareness. They're pretty large too. I think they're about 3 feet, so they're big. But yeah, so I just took a T-post out there and then put them on there, got some bolts, super easy. And there's different walking paths in this park. It's not super huge, but just made it so when people are walking through, they're aware that there is purple loosestrife and it's being managed in this park. I think the signs were maybe a couple $100. They were pretty cheap. And then lastly, we had a workshop on July 31st at the park. There were 9 people in attendance. And again, we just discussed the biology of the beetles and the plants. We discussed any kind of required permits and how to find locations or report purple loosestrife, and then we released the beetles. So again, this was done in partnership with our extension office, DNR, and then our local parks department. And so these are just a few pictures of the workshop. We had a few handouts, and then kind of just showed some pictures of kind of the process of rearing the beetles. And then this is Brooke, an intern with Extension, explaining the biology of the purple loosestrife plant. Again, Extension office explaining more about the beetles. And then this was one of the locations at Rays Lake Park. It's on the south side, and there was a ton of cattails. And the purple loosestrife are actually kind of entwined with the cattails and were growing in alongside them. So it was nice though, because it was purple with the flowers, so you could see them and they stood out, but I could see how it'd be more difficult if they didn't have the flowers. It'd be a lot trickier to see that on the side of the road. And there were actually existing beetle populations here, which we found out at the workshop, which was great. So we just added to the population essentially. So some lessons learned about this whole process was the preparation part was key. So getting those permits, getting the plants, the beetles, all of our materials ahead of time really made this a smooth transition. So then when we were ready to release the beetles, like that's all we had to worry about and do the workshop. So just getting that stuff ahead of time, like planning now, would be really important. I think if we did this again, and I think we're going to this summer, is just marketing the workshop and event a little further ahead of time. It was kind of, again, first time doing this, didn't know what to expect, but I think there's a lot of interest from the public. So just making sure we have enough time to market it, and then hopefully maybe do it on a weekend or a weeknight would be better. And last but not least, and probably the most important part of this whole thing, was the partnerships is what made this possible. Without the DNR and Extension Office, it would have been really difficult for us to get this project off the ground. And it was great. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And with that, I'll leave it up for questions, and I will stop sharing my screen here. All right.
Thank you, Holly. Yeah,
Yep.
Does anybody have questions?
I don't have a question, but I just have to say, thank you so much for your efforts. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was super fun. I don't always get to do great things, fun things. And this was one of the things I was super excited about. And it was so easy. And again, it's a good educational tool. So I can't express enough how fun this was. And I encourage everyone to do it. It's super easy.
Yeah, thank you both. We do have, let me see, Liz.
Yeah, forgive me if you said this and I didn't hear it, but how long does it take from when you add the beetles to the plant to when you can harvest them?
Let's see, we grabbed them. Well, it depends on the release time, but I think summer was kind of our goal. So maybe a month or two is roughly when the moment we grabbed the beetles. Their life cycle is a little different too. So just when we grabbed them to releasing them, it was like a month or two. So it wasn't a whole long time, but I just wanted to make sure there was enough time that they could get acclimated, and potentially those larvae could turn into adults. So, but yeah, it's pretty short.
And I'll just echo April and Holly's comments. I did loosestrife beetle collection for a number of years when I first started working here, and it is such an interesting project to learn about and to do. And from a biocontrol perspective, the learning angle is really interesting and engages people to do this. I mean, the beetles are such a, it's, to go back to the question, I think it's such a great poster child for biocontrol, because these beetles, the larvae eat the flower spikes and the adults eat the leaves, and they basically just eat purple loosestrife, and there's not a lot of other impacts, and so they make this great poster child, and they're fun to, relatively easy to rear and help move around the state. Any other questions, purple loosestrife related? I'll open it up for Holly and April.
This is Sharon Natzel.
Hey, Sharon.
And I asked a question in chat just now, but I'll just ask now, like, is there anything you have to do special in the wintertime regarding the beetles?
So no, they go into the root crown and they essentially like hibernate there until they emerge then in the spring.
Okay, thank you.
And one tip too is when you're trying to put the beetles out, you take the whole pot with you out to your site, and you put the pot right next to the like stand of plants that you want the beetles to go to. And the best way to do it is to intertwine the stand with beetles and the stand without, and kind of intertwine the actual stems. So then the beetles can just find their way to the unpopulated plants. And then what you can do is, you know, a month or two, or in the winter, you can go back and get your pots.
I'll add to the winter question with, since I've only been involved in collecting and moving beetles around, not the rearing angle. Do the plants that you keep in pots, do they survive the winter? Do they freeze? Do the pots freeze and kill the plant? And are you starting over each year, or are you rearing beetles from the same plants and essentially the same beetle stock year after year? Or is this like a 1 year and then start, is it a yearly cycle, or is it a continuing cycle?
That's a good question. I didn't try to reuse my purple loosestrife. They just looked like they died. I
Yep.
think they need a continual water source, maybe even over the winter. But I'm not sure. I haven't tried it.
I would think they would, when pots would freeze, I'm thinking that they would die because the roots will freeze and die. I wonder
Yeah,
if you
I would think
could,
so.
like, there are some plants that can overwinter. I've brought them inside and kept them, essentially they go dormant, so they don't need much water throughout the season. It'd be interesting, I guess, to try to see if you could reuse and new vegetation would grow from the rootstock. And then one other question,
Right.
since we have 1 minute left, so from the collection perspective, beetles as a defense mechanism, when you disturb the plant, they all fall off. And that was always frustrating to collect. How do you move the plant and intertwine it with the new plants and keep beetles on that pot and vegetation? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Even if they fall off, they'll at least be close
Yeah.
to it. That's not as much of an issue. Even if you have, you know, one stem that don't have beetles on it, but the actual plant does, the rest of the plant does, they'll find their way. And these beetles can fly. You know, once they're done with a site, they don't have any purple loosestrife left, right, to eat, they can move on to a different site.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I just remember trying to collect them and you find this plant that's covered
I
in them
know.
and you accidentally like step heavy and shake the plant and you just see like 100 fall off. And yeah.
Mm.
Okay, we are at 10:20, so we're right on time. I will put up I'll share my screen again but we're on break until, let me check, till 10:30, and then I'll come back and talk about boater observation. So everybody take a 10-minute break, stand up, walk around, and we'll see you in 10. All right, it's 10:30. Maybe just an emoji or like the React tool or a hand raise. Are people back? All right. Let me get my presentation up. All right, now it's my turn to ask. April, can you see my?
Yep, looks
Awesome.
perfect.
Great, thank you. All right, so today I will be talking about a study that we had funded and done last season regarding AIS prevention tools at public water accesses and focusing on essentially boater behaviors at locations that had different types of tools. It's always a hard question to ask when nobody's watching. What are people doing at accesses? So this was a study to try to look at that and see what was happening. So I guess a first caveat, I generally have lots of photos in my slides. This one doesn't have a ton of photos and it has lots of text heavy slides just because this is a very dense report with a ton of numbers. So I'm kind of cherry picking some things out to talk about today. Tina and Doug will most likely be sharing this out, or I'll chat with Tina on how we're planning on distributing the report. We were finishing up some accessibility issues on the PDF document, and but we're going to be sharing this document with everybody as well to dig in deeper to the report. Just a quick background slide. This is an older survey that Tina oversaw, looking at a survey of licensed anglers and then another survey of registered watercraft owners. And the few responses that we pulled out here, the main one that we're looking at is this top one, what would prevent you from cleaning and draining your boat? And of course, we have nothing as the top answer, but then another answer, about 27% of those responses said that they didn't have the tools or equipment that they needed. And on the right-hand side, a larger survey of watercraft owners. Again, about 20% of those boaters, the highlighted in green at the bottom there, had asked about tools for cleaning weeds and aquatic invasive species at the access. So, you know, around 20%, 20 to 30% of boaters that we've studied have expressed a desire for tools. There are tools at a number of accesses in the state at this point. And again, we wanted to look to see are those numbers, are those trends sort of consistent with the general population that's using the access? Are more people using the tools, or less? So that was the main motivation behind doing this project. So again, the goal here is assessing the use of the self-service cleaning stations at public water accesses. There's a photo of one type of station there on the left. This was a project that was done by a contractor, so DNR staff didn't do this project. We just funded it and had an RFP for the work. At the end of the day, 12 public water accesses in the metro and north central Minnesota were selected. And they were selected based on the types of tools that were there. There's 3 main station types or classifications that we have for stations right now. And those are the CD3 machines, which everybody should be pretty familiar with. Aqua Weed Stick is another Minnesota company that provides some tools out at a different scale than CD3. And then the third option of homemade stations. You know, the tools themselves are pretty simple devices, and it's possible to make your own station. So we looked at some of those as well. There was a total of 8 different tool types that they observed. Those are a wrench, like a drain plug wrench, the aqua weed stick. That's a photo of an aqua weed stick on the left there. I know it's kind of hard to see, but it's a 3D printed head on a stick that helps either pinch weeds off or hook and pull them off. In addition to that, there's air pressure hoses. Those are the hoses on CD3 machines to help spray water out of areas or potentially spray some things off using air pressure. Vacuum the grabber tool, which again is very similar to the aquaweed stick. Instead of sort of pinching and pulling, you're grabbing and pulling. Brushes to help remove things. Lights was counted as a tool. And then the last one, which is a little outside the box, is hands. So I know when we see these and people talk about wanting tools at accesses, the observers also noticed a large number of people using their hands, which hands can be a tool as well. And it's obviously a good behavior to see people doing those removal things. So they wanted to classify it and count the number of boaters that were using their hands as well. They spent 198 hours observing boaters at accesses. And in that time, they observed 597 boats and they conducted 43 interviews. Some limitations of that, as you look at those numbers, it's a pretty good amount. The number of boats is lower than we'd like. We'd obviously like massive data sets to look at, but there's some challenges here. We really wanted to look at accesses when nobody else was there were no other factors at play. So the big limiting factor here was that they went to locations that had inspectors, but we were at those locations to do this observation study when no inspectors were present. Essentially, that means they were there when the accesses were less busy, because inspectors have typically been there during the busiest times. So it's just a harder thing to juggle with this. In the future, potentially we could try to shift inspectors away, but that's also tough to move them away during the busy time just to observe. But that's definitely a challenge there. Other limitations and challenges to trying to quantify the results of this is regarding the accesses themselves. If you drive around and look at accesses, they're not standardized in any way, shape, or form. And so it's hard to standardize them when looking at results. Every access has unique characteristics, challenges, restrictions, size, parking, traffic flow, all of those things are very hard to quantify to know what kind of impact those might have on whether or not a boater chose to go to a station. And lastly, a low number of tool uses was observed. And again, when you're dealing with a small sample size like that, it's hard to make very explicit or discrete judgment calls based on what we're seeing. Here are some of the examples of the stations and layouts. So again, you can see some accesses are very well developed with clear entrance and exit and concrete and lines and signs and tape and everything else to try to guide people through locations. Others are gravel and they're very remote sites. And while there's a perceived traffic flow, there's no indications of traffic flow or anything like that. So a wide variety of locations. And then the stations look very different from one to another. The CD3 is the standard for this large, very high tech, very complex piece of equipment with lots of advertising and stopping, clean, drain, dry, clean, drain, dispose, stop invasive species messaging on there. And then there's the homemade stations with some signage and essentially various tools just hanging on with lanyards, or the aquaweed stick with maybe some tethered tools to a signpost like that. So a wide variety of tools that are available for managers to use. Okay, so into the observation results. And first and foremost, like I mentioned, tool use was pretty low. Only 12% of exiting boaters used tools provided. That's not all that surprising. Again, given that in a survey, about 20% of people were using that as a reason or something that they'd like to see. 12% is kind of an expected number, and it's a low number, but it's still good to see people are using tools that are available to them. Some good information to pull from this is that accesses with designated AIS cleaning areas, again, the ones that can have the luxury of signage and direction to guide people to locations, they're 1.4 times likely to stop at the station and do hand cleaning at a minimum if there is dedicated AIS cleaning areas. And they were 4 times as likely to use tools provided if there is a dedicated and marked AIS cleaning area. Some other good news from this is people were able to use the tools in a quick fashion to help improve their inspection, their exit inspection. So people were using the tools for about less than 2 minutes as opposed to those that were not using it. So from a messaging perspective, and I'll touch on that later, might be able to just highlight that it doesn't take a whole lot longer to come over and use these tools that help you finish the job as compared to just trying to do it on your own. Again, since this was an observation study, we looked at what boaters were doing in addition to the tool use. 96.3% of the boaters arrived without visible vegetation on their boats or trailers. And on the flip side, about 18% of boaters left with attached vegetation. And I think a key thing here, so the total number there is 54 boaters left with vegetation. 49 of those boaters didn't use the station at all. So there's a small number of boaters that pulled up to the station, removed some things, didn't remove everything, and left, even though they used the tool station. But a lot of the boaters that were leaving with vegetation attached didn't stop at the station at all. And then lastly, stations that have been in place longer, we're seeing higher rates of use. 5-year stations were at 13, 2 to 3 were at 12, and brand new stations were at 8%. And again, it's a small sample size, so it's hard to pull very concrete things away from that. But in general, there's a nice uptick the longer the station has been in place. Maybe people are more comfortable with it, using it more often. On the right-hand side, I'm not going to go through all these numbers, but they are in the report. You can see the breakdown of the different accesses that they went to. The counties for CD3 were Beltrami, Crow Wing, Hennepin. And for home aid, it was Meeker County, Cass County, and Washington County. And the aqua weed stick was in Anoka County, Todd County, and Hubbard County. A little bit of the demographics that were seen during this. The majority of the watercraft that the observers saw were fishing boats. To put on my watercraft inspection hat, this pie chart doesn't look all that dissimilar to the pie chart for what we would look at for boat types inspected during a normal season. Fishing boats dominate that realm, followed by runabouts and then pontoons and wake sport boats and on down the line. From a tool use perspective, the ski boat or cruisers in this class would be what we'd call a runabout. Essentially, they're those boats that don't have ballast tanks. Were observed at is using the tools 15% of the time, followed by fishing boats at a 14%, pontoon boats at 12%, those personal watercraft jet skis at 12%, and then wake sport boats at 7%. They did notice that canoes and kayaks and things of that nature were never observed as using those stations, but those types of watercraft really aren't the market necessarily for the stations. Maybe a vacuum might help get some water out of some areas, but they're pretty easy to hand inspect compared to something that's showing up on a trailer. As far as the tools themselves, the most used tools were hands, which I know is sort of cheating because hands are everywhere. But it's I think they wanted to include that just to highlight that people are still taking appropriate actions at these locations when they're not being observed. They just might not be choosing to use the tools. Various people have different agility levels and things of that nature. It might just be simpler for myself to climb under and pull the vegetation off versus trying to manipulate some of these tools. So hands is a very viable thing to be there. In relation or in regard to the actual tools that were present, the aqua weed stick saw the most use at 15 and then the grabber tool was second at 7. And if we look at both of those together, they're both doing that same job, right? So if I'm looking at tool use based on what type of activity we're doing, it seems like the most common tool that people chose to engage with were tools to help them remove vegetation from hard to reach areas like the trailer. You're not really using an aqua weed stick or a grabber tool to pick off individual zebra mussels or things of that nature. And other types of tools, again, like a brush that you might use to scrape things off. 9 of the sites provided brushes, and they observed 3 times being used. Lights is on there as a 0. Those were obviously tools that are available to them. From a safety perspective, the observers were not at accesses at night. So again, it doesn't really surprise me that we have a 0 for lights because it was daylight when they were out there. And these lights aren't necessarily angled to provide more of a viewing area on the underside of the hull. They're meant to provide some illumination when boaters are there at night. The vacuum was used, the air pressure hose is up there, and then also the wrench was used 24 times. There were interview questions that were asked to boaters as well that were leaving to try to look at motivations for taking actions and barriers that may have prevented them from taking action. And this is just the quick breakdown for what that is. They like a clean boat being a main motivator, followed very closely behind with the best message we like to see of preventing the spread of AIS. So people are motivated to use tools based on the those 2 things right there. At the bottom, you're kind of in the middle, we can see that the signs say so at 14%. Again, maybe highlighting that they're not reading the signs or they're not taking that in, but that the signs aren't necessarily providing that solid motivation to get them to do that behavior. On the flip side, and this one was kind of hard for me to interpret as well regarding barriers because nothing as a barrier, it's unclear to me if that nothing meant that they just didn't care or that they are fine with the tools that are there and they don't have a barrier. That one was kind of tough for me to tease out. But the main barrier there, I think, is time and high traffic were the 2. And if you remember from my first slide, people spent about 2 minutes at the stations to use the tools. And so maybe this time is a misconception. We often hear about time as being a barrier to inspection, decontamination, now tool use stations. But the reality is it's not that big of a time. It's not that big of a time commitment. And so maybe we can try to work on messaging towards time. A few final things, and I'll wrap up here and get to some questions. I wanted to touch on entering watercraft a little bit. So when possible, behaviors were observed on entering watercraft. They looked really for the 2 most obvious things that somebody would be able to see from sort of viewing from afar. It's very challenging to look for zebra mussels hidden on the underside of a hull when you're just watching somebody come in. So they really looked at and focused on drain plugs and visible vegetation. They observed about 95%, 12 of 228 boats had the drain plugs out. There were a number of boats that were marked as unsure. Basically, they couldn't verify that the plug was out. So those I didn't include in that breakdown. That 95%, that does track pretty closely with what inspectors observe as well. We're around, I don't remember off the top of my head for this past year, but between 95 and 97% compliance on drain plugs generally. So that seems to match, even though there were no inspectors there. But these are accesses that inspectors are present at. And so that's always a question that we wonder if behaviors could be based on potential to see an inspector. So we do see a similar number there. And on visible vegetation, there were 2 watercraft that showed up with visible vegetation. And the one note from a tool use perspective is that nobody on the way in to a watercraft or to a launch used tools for an inspection. And one thing that in hindsight would have been nice to capture is if they did an inspection on the way in or not. In general, and this will be my own anecdotal observations, but in general, when inspectors are present, they're doing incoming and outgoing inspections. I have a feeling most boaters on their own aren't doing that second walk around inspection before launching. And they're basing their did I inspect my watercraft based on when they last left. And we know that people can miss things, human error happens, and it'd be really nice to figure out a way to increase that that inspection before launching as well. And for those of you that might be considering tool use or installing tool stations at locations that are not infested with a particular species. So if you're worried about milfoil, providing tools, they seem to be used by exiting boaters almost exclusively. And so if you're trying to utilize a tool station to prevent something from coming to the lake, I think we need to work and figure out some messaging to try and encourage people to stop at a station before launching. And a lot of that might have to do with the location of the stations. They're generally located in the traffic flow for exiting boats, but just food for thought there. From a cost perspective, there's some breakdown in there. The homemade stations, without a doubt, are the cheapest to create and provide. They varied in this study from $55 to $90. The aqua weed sticks with the tethered tools ranged from $360 to $2,340. And then the CD3 machines range from their small kiosks at 2,800 up to 40,000 for the big unit that you'll see in that photo there. I'll just end with some recommendations here. It seems like the best way to maximize tool use is to pair stations with designated AIS cleaning areas. And again, this would be for both arriving and exiting boaters. And I know space is really hard and space can be at a premium, and we don't have a lot of options with this. But if you're really trying to get tool use on the way in, we really need to start thinking about AIS inspection, self-inspection stations or locations for entering boaters, as well as stations for exiting boaters. And those might be located in 2 spatially different areas. Whenever possible, include clear stop indicators and place these stations along that natural flow of traffic that's in the access. Providing popular tools, so providing the aqua weed stick and the grabber. The wrench, again, was a very popular tool. Providing those tools maybe as the primary recommendations is helpful. And then again, what can we do to improve communication on this? Trying to improve consistent messaging and designs will maybe help voters understand that that's what this sign is. Sometimes we talk about sign blindness, and there's so many signs at a location, or I see them over and over again, so I stop registering them as a thing. But hopefully if we can get this standardized language, they help to see that station that's there. Promoting the stations, what they are and how to use them. And again, from a messaging, encouraging their use for arriving boaters. I mentioned earlier too that it only took about 2 minutes for people to use the stations. And so again, trying to message that it takes a little bit of extra time to use these tools, and hopefully it'll help you make you more efficient at getting things off. As well as maybe some messaging if we can get some clear messaging in there about where to look. In some places that are hard to reach and see are really those high risk areas because we're not physically looking to check for things there. Another unintended consequence of this study is this last bullet here of maintenance needs and reporting those promptly to the station owner. At the beginning of the season, when we started this project, we had collected a list of locations of tool stations throughout the state to give to our contractor to decide where to go. We weren't really guiding where they were going. And in a couple of instances, places they had identified as spots to go investigate, the tool stations were broken or things were missing. They weren't able to get replacements fast enough for us to observe there, and so we had to move elsewhere. I know in general from other presentations I've sat in on, tool use or tool stations have been relatively vandal free. But I think it's just important to have a very routine and probably often check. So utilizing partners or lake association partners to check weekly to make sure that tools are there is really important, because if we place a tool station out there and we check it 3 times a year, if something is missing, it could have been missing for months, and it's just not helping reinforce that people are able to use the tools that are present. And I'll just end. I know I went too long here on my talk, which I tend to do, but some takeaways here. We did present this to our Parks and Trails staff as well. Tina presented that, very similar information to them, just to know. As far as just some goals and reminders, not all sites are going to be feasible for tool stations or the type of tool stations you might want. So we might have to do some working to look at what is applicable or what would work at that location. And from an internal procedure, Tina's the one that deals with this much more than myself, so she can talk with more firsthand knowledge. But single post installations seem to be the most economical and easiest to approve from a DNR approval perspective. So it's a special use permit to get one of those posts installed. If you have to do anything with precast concrete or poured concrete, it requires a lease of the land. There's a no-cost lease, as to my understanding, but that's just a much longer process. And it's not saying that you can't do that by any means, but as far as a speed and ease, the economical approach is these single post installations at locations. If you have questions about getting stations installed at any of the DNR locations, feel free to reach out to myself. I most likely will be checking in with Tina though, and so feel free to reach out to Tina Fitzgerald as well if you have any questions. And that's that. Does anybody have any questions for me?
There are a couple in chat, Adam. Actually, Tina's been in there and answered the first, but Nick
Okay,
has a
awesome.
question, or actually just to remind the audience that, about the AIS cleaning station project on the March 21st presentation. So I guess I just sort of did that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Sam, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Hey Adam, Sam with Cooch Soil and Water here.
Sam.
I think you kind of touched on this on the last slide with the it's not feasible at every site, and what you were kind of showing was a lot of these tools are obviously for vegetation, which at a lot of our sites you're not seeing a ton of vegetation like at the landings or coming off on boats or trailers or anything like that. Do you think using more messaging for like the spiny water flea and the zebra mussels is better use of time and money, like up here, especially at the landings, instead of like the tools, having tools and stuff at sites?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the answer outside of just my own anecdotal thoughts. There is a comment in the study that talks about part of the lack of tool use could be noted as a product of there not being vegetation on the watercraft, and a lot of the accesses, like you said, weren't as weedy as some accesses throughout the state tend to be. So I think that does play into, obviously, if there's nothing to remove with a grabber tool, you're not going to go over and just pick it up and walk around the boat with it in your hand. So that's something to keep in mind with stations. I do think, yeah, the brush is likely the key tool to try to remove adult zebra mussels. I know inspectors have brushes and nylon, like paint scrapers or other things to try to remove them. So there could be some messaging around that, or trying to target tools that would be more beneficial for that. But no, I don't have an answer for you if it's better to just invest in education regarding spiny water flea and zebra mussels or tool stations, or if there's a combination of two.
Thanks.
Hey, any other final thoughts? Sharon just has a question for the Long Lake in Hubbard County. Was the observer at the south access? I don't know off the top of my head without looking at it at the study. I don't know that it's pointed out in there as to which access it is. And Tina, I don't know if you remember, but feel free to answer Sharon in the chat. Okay. Okay, then last, we're 5 minutes behind. Oh, is there one more question? Okay, I will, is Joe here, and he can hop on for the last bit of the Keep It Clean law.
I am here, and thank you very much.
Perfect.
Let's see
Thanks,
here.
Joe. And we've got time, so sorry, I tend to go long, so we'll feel free to use your whole time.
No, I'm good. Can everybody see the slideshow here?
Yep, we gotcha.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Joe Albert. I'm the communications coordinator in the Division of Enforcement at DNR. I probably know some of you, but just by way of background, I've been at DNR now for about 6 years. A lot of what I do kind of relates to media, social media, and this would kind of be as otherwise assigned. But you know, we've certainly been active with the new litter on ice law. So I will talk a little bit about that. Basically, you know, by way of background, ice fishing has been growing in popularity in Minnesota now for many years. And it's a lot different than a lot of us grew up with. And, you know, you're seeing people with deluxe fish houses, and ice camping has become a big thing. And, you know, as we've seen this increase, which is great, there have also been, you know, more and more instances of litter. You can see this, you know, the picture on the right there. That used to be fairly common to see things like that, and litter on ice is still one of the main complaints that conservation officers receive every winter. And so, you know, there's bottles and there's cans and there's boxes, cigarette butts, you know, dead minnows and other bait that people leave behind. And it used to be, it was really hard for conservation officers to make these cases because, you know, of the ways the laws were written. And, you know, so I think it's always been an issue that's, you know, it's been growing. And then I think what really pushed it over the edge was, it kind of relates back to the deluxe fish houses like ice castles and whatnot, where people are spending a week or a weekend or, you know, several days on the lake. And they were dumping their sewage from their holding tanks before they left, which is obviously, you know, it's disgusting. And it, you know, it provoke, excuse me, it, you know, it's also a risk to the environment because everything that obviously is on the ice winds up in the lakes. And so we had this Keep It Clean group that really got involved in terms of litter on the ice. And they pushed for this new statute that passed the legislature, signed by the governor last year. And it really got specific about what we were talking about with litter on the ice. So you can see here, I mean, it talks about garbage, rubbish, cigarette filters, debris from fireworks, offal, the body of a dead animal, which would include dead minnows, litter, sewage. And basically, it made people, rather than putting it right on the ice, you had to put it in a container. Some people used bags. But what we're really thinking of is, a hard plastic container, a trash can, something that's not going to itself freeze to the ice. And then obviously it defines sewage. It's a petty misdemeanor, so a fine of $100. And I would say that's one of the most common things that we hear is, if you really want to get at this, you really want to change behavior, you need to increase that fine. So, that's not something that we can do ourselves, but something we certainly take into account. So one of the big things is previously conservation officers, they would see people out fishing. There would be all sorts of junk around them. They didn't really have a way to, at the moment, say, this is litter, because they were still in attendance of it. And so people would say, yeah, we'll pick that up before we go. And then, of course, that wouldn't happen, or something would blow away, or something would be, covered up by snow. And so the new law basically says that right away they have to secure whatever garbage or litter it is, and not just have it sitting on the ice. Now there's still some gray area there. People will, they want to have their, boxes of beer or pop or whatever sitting out, outside their fish house, and say, well, it's like a cooler out there. And so if they haven't opened the bottles or the cans, then yeah, they're probably not, in violation of the law. But the overall goal is to get people to secure things right away so that they don't get blown away, they don't get forgotten. And so that's, one of the things we used to see all the time with bait is that people would, they'd reel up, the minnow is dead, they'd toss it, and then, forget about it, or leave it there. And, that all of that ends up in the lake. The statute didn't change the bait disposal regulations. It's still, what was illegal before is still illegal now. But it required people to secure their bait, to put it in some sort of a container that wasn't going to blow away or wasn't going to be frozen to the ice. It was kind of a weird year to communicate about this, just given the winter we had. But as soon as the law passed, the Keep It Clean campaign, and others really started talking about this law, what was going to change, what was going to be expected, why it needed to happen. They had a very strong presence at the state fair. There was a lot of media interest in what they were doing and showing. And then as far as DNR goes, we don't typically start communicating about new laws right away. It's more when they actually, not when they, like this one went into effect in the summer, but it's more when, it's going to start affecting people. And so we were working with the Keep It Clean campaign. They knew what we were doing. We knew what they were doing. And as far as the DNR went, we did the traditional news releases, direct media outreach. We did some advertising, social media. You can see this post here on the right here, that was posted on the DNR main page. And it just, it shows photos of what we were seeing out there. I think the bottom right there is that's actually a Christmas tree. I was going to say it looked like a sewage one. We have a few of those. We don't use them that often because they're disgusting to look at. And then, just somebody out there picking up trash, which people shouldn't have to do if it's not theirs. We see it a lot where people pick up after other people because, 99% of the people who are out there fishing care about the lake, care about natural resources, and will do what it takes to ensure that we don't have trash left out on the ice, even if it's not theirs. Kind of back to the messaging, all the conservation officers had talking points and they used those frequently in media interviews, also, in interactions with the public, because they're talking to people all the time. And so they would, mention this law, especially people who they know in their local area who ice fish and that sort of thing. They talk to resorts, they talk to community groups. And so it was really a broad effort to get the word out. But again, the ice conditions this year, it made it weird to communicate it, because we didn't want to be talking about the ice and people out using the ice and on the ice and, kind of insinuating that it was safe. And so that was a line that we straddled. It wasn't always easy. And I think it probably limited the extent of communications that we had going out, but it just, it kind of was what it was. In terms of the enforcement efforts, this year was really, really focused on education. And that's very common when we have new laws and statutes and rules, that we're not out there giving people tickets, for minor violations. We're really looking to educate them on the new law, help them understand it, and, especially help them understand why it's necessary and the role that they play, as individuals in meeting the law and why it's important. And in this case, litter is, an eyesore for people who live on the lake and others. It gives ice fishermen a bad name, but there's also the environmental impacts as well. And, just in kind of talking with people who are out ice fishing, from what I've been able to glean from talking to conservation officers, people were very much aware of the law. We didn't, drill down into how they learned about it, whether it was in the media, social media, the resorts talking to them about what they had to do. But awareness was really high, and overall, people did a really good job of following it. There's, you can see here below, for the whole season, we issued 63 verbal warnings and 4 citations. And so the citations obviously are people who it was very egregious, or maybe we came in contact with them a few times, or multiple times. But in any case, they were kind of repeat violators. But otherwise, it was very strong on verbal warnings, and just getting people to understand the law. As you might expect, just given the fact that a lot of the southern half of the state didn't have great ice. There wasn't a lot of people, certainly using the ice castles and other big fish houses. So the vast majority of the enforcement contacts were in the northern part of the state. You can see here, St. Louis County had 13, Lake of the Woods had 8, Lake of the Woods had 12, sorry, Cass 8, and 7 in Beltrami County. So, overall, it it was an interesting year. It's hard to compare year over year, and I think given the fact that this winter was so odd, we likely will continue next year with the educational focus rather than the citation focus, and see where that goes. But generally speaking, it was very successful. People were aware of it, and the vast majority of people did what they needed to do, to clean up after themselves and basically, leave nothing in the ice but an impression. So that's what I've got, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Joe. There is a one question in the chat just regarding the fine for littering, and if there's any, if you can explain how fines are selected. The question's just around the low nature of the fine.
Yeah, I'm not certain, and it's always been very low. And I know that there's been discussion about increasing it at the legislature, and that has never gone anywhere. So that's, yeah, but it's a very common question we get is why is it so low?
Right, thank you.
All right,
Any other
thanks, everyone.
questions? Okay, yeah, thank you, Joe. All right, so for the last portion of today's call, we are just moving over into an open discussion. I know we were scheduled to have other speakers earlier, but there was a conflict that came up. So we are going to just open it up to the floor for open discussion. Any other questions to the presenters today? Things of that nature. Does anybody have anything? Now's your chance.
This is Sharon Natzel. I was wondering if you guys are planning to do another study on observations to carry on kind of what was done last year.
We don't have plans currently to do it again.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I'm just getting to the Russ, go ahead.
So on the tool stations, I had some thoughts on that. And for our county, we've kept things pretty basic and simple and used just the homemade tool stations at some of the accesses. Every county is unique with their funding and their budget, their lakes and their accesses. But I think the thing I always go back to is that the laws were designed so that it's absolutely free for boaters to follow them. So at least for us, we don't tend to use the more expensive tool stations. You know, the CD3s. We have some of the eyelid sensor units at our accesses, but we're actually working to sell those back each year. We're actually down to half of what we used to have of those.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. I will add, just to piggyback off of that, one of the nice things with this observation again, and just looking at how people utilize tool stations and what we know about the inspection process and, finding species, and there's studies looking at how efficiently boaters and inspectors and trained people and educated people find and remove things from boats, and there's a high probability of human error to occur where we see time and again checking again or slowing down or having other people look. Having tools available helps improve the effectiveness of the actions, and that's a nice thing to keep in mind as managers, that tool stations are another tool in the toolbox to provide kind of that 24-hour a day access to giving people what they've expressed they want, which is access to tools. I don't think that when we talk about different prevention methods, I don't think that they're a replacement for other types of prevention. But I think they nest really well with other types. And I'm talking, mostly inspectors and having people there to help educate boaters about what to do and really to help with that entering inspection aspect. And, you can have inspectors help talk and, relay what the tool stations are, things of that nature. I know somebody did have their hand up and it disappeared. Was it Kyle? Yeah, go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks. I'm really curious about the tool stations. Here in Aiken, I don't think we've have any really. We've debated the CD3s, but they just seem really expensive. So I'm wondering about obtain. I know about the aqua weed stick, but then the wrenches and the other grabbers and things. Is there a good resource to purchase those tools from?
We could definitely connect you with the programs that have created homemade stations. And
Okay.
I see Nick's hopping on with some questions. He has a lot of experience at getting some tool stations out there. I'll be quiet and let him jump in.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, on March 21, we'll be making a presentation about 11:30 about the project we have in Cass County, where we are in the process of completing our installation of about 100 of these tool stations. Our cost is about $105 for the post, the sign, an aqua weed stick, a grabber, a long handle brush, and a green buster wrench. So far, we've lost about 4 tools out of what we put out. And I'm also applying to the LCCMR for funding for an additional 300 stations. And they're quite interested, the legislature is, on what we're doing at a conference call with them. And so I'll be talking about that proposal presentation as well at the end of my talk on March 21. I can also send you, if you send me your email address, I can send you some information on what we've done. We've been sharing that with Itasca County and Wright County, and they plan to install their own stations. But I have a list of vendors, pricing, the whole process that was followed.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Nick. I'll put my email in the chat if you could send me
And
some
Nick,
info.
would you mind putting your email in the chat too?
I will do that right now.
Great. And just to touch on another comment too, to piggyback off Sharon's question, and Tina added in there that groups are welcome to do this study. And like I said, there were some things that we thought about in hindsight that would have been nice to observe as well. There's just this large question around what do people do at accesses when there's nobody there watching them. And that's a sociological question that is in a variety of, I mean, it's in everything. There's studies trying to look at that, but we'd be happy to give you the data sheets that they used. I mean, you could replicate this exact study if you liked. You could take it and tweak it a little bit. The more observations we can get, that would be great. And if you're thinking about installing a tool station, you could do pre and post observations and looking at behaviors before you put it in and comparing it to after, things of that nature. So yeah, please connect with us if that's something you think you have funding or the availability to do. Justin from Douglas County added in the chat too that they have 3 aqua weed stick stations, and oh no, I just lost it. They've had no vandalism issue over the last 3 years, and they're looking at purchasing and installing 3 more stations this season. And they are at accesses inspectors go to, so they can check on the stations and tell boaters about them as well. I just saw a hand was up, but maybe that was one that just forgot to get put down. Any other questions or comments? Otherwise, we'll give you a half hour of your day back.
Before people go, we're gonna take a picture.
And Jessica added from Anoka County that they've had some vandalism of aquaweed stations. Last year, they lost a few sticks and a station was completely destroyed. So again, the checking of the stations, I think, is really key. And especially if you have inspectors heading out and And even if they're at stations where inspectors aren't present, you could potentially have inspectors go observe them or go take a look at them once every 2 weeks or something like that. April, I think you're going to do the screenshot, right? Okay.
Sure can. I'll channel my inner Tina. I'm having screen issues today too. I'm glad I am behind the scenes because, yeah, a new computer is not matching up with my screen setup. So anyway,
Oh, yeah.
all right. I see so many great smiley faces on here. Are you all ready? Gonna do a couple. There's one, and we're gonna do another one. Everyone smile. Excellent. Thanks, folks. Except I'm
Did that
not
pose
smiling.
for a half hour.
Okay. Right.
I suppose you can probably stop the recording now if we have no more questions either.
Thank you for the reminder.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.